high in the polls, guys, aren't they? You've got this Greens-Labour coordination going on, which some people are saying, may not work. Rodney, what do you think? What can you read into National being so high in the polls?
Well, it's always hard to read these polls because they're just, like a snapshot and a trend. But it would appear to me to be this, that John Key has effectively positioned National into the centre and indeed across the line at different times. So he's actually eating into Labour's lunch. He's the food in schools would be a classic John Key initiative. And also what's happened to Labour is, rightly or wrongly, they're trying to show that they can work with the Greens, but that's actually pulled them further off the middle. And I think that makes it difficult for Labour to win back that middle ground. That's where Labour and National fight it out, in the middle ground. John Key has got it, and David Shearer, by hooking up with the Greens, has lost it. When Helen Clark signed up to the alliance, she made the alliance come to them, and it looked like, she was sort of in control. To me, and I might be biased, I don't know, it looked that somehow Russell Norman was pulling David Shearer across.
Very interesting stuff. And that brings me into Russell Norman's responses. He talks of Muldoonism with the National, and also where and what are we hearing from the Finance Minister, David Parker, in all of this, Selwyn? Rodney's got a good point, hasn't he?
Yeah, well, with respect to where Labour is sitting on this, I think it's a totally different kettle of fish to the 2000s or 1999 when Helen Clark's lot were pulling the alliance along, and the alliance putting in policies like the abandoning the market rents for state house tenants, etc., those types of things. But what we're seeing now, I think, clearly is Russell Norman, he's on his stride, but where they're working with the finance and economics teams in Labour is on solution-based policies. Issues like, the Power illustrated that, and it seemed, their power solution to the problems here. They connected perhaps with people and the voters by saying, this is going to sort out this rot that you've been suffering from for a long time. That seemed to be the rhetoric there. Now, the ideology, even to a degree, was out of it. So you saw Key coming back, trying to peel it away with an ideological argument, saying they're in the far left, they're crazy, they're this, they're that, they're communist, etc. So the wedge strategy has been deployed to try and drive in between Labour and the Greens. The challenge really is for Labour's leader, David Shearer, to bed in strong as a leader in his own right. Now, it seemed that what I mean by that, the population in the polls, if you take the polls, as a guide, they seem to support the policy, but they didn't necessarily apply that support to their party preference. And it really is up to Labour to make sure that their leader and those that are there that are presenting as cabinet ministers in waiting convince the public that they are indeed waiting.
So you agree with Rodney Hyde on this? You don't want to be pulled along by people like Russell Norman?
I'm not necessarily saying that. I think that these two parties, if they're going to be successful, need to be progressive in their solutions to the problems that the average Kiwi voter is being presented with. When Kevin Rudd won the election off John Howard, and you've got to say that's not an easy thing for anyone to have done when John Howard was a slick operator. Rudd said at that stage, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but he said the left-right argument is not necessarily the reality today. It's about progressive politics and it's about conservative. Conservative is old, this is about new.
Rodney Hyde, who's going to win the election?
I don't know. The difficulty for John Key is coalition partners. There's a sort of belief, whether it's true or not, that under MMP you can't govern alone. And what Helen Clark had to do with every new election was actually get a new coalition partner. And it's trouble for Peter Dunn. It's trouble, obviously, for the ACT Party. And the Maori Party's in trouble. And so I think that's what's going to make it tough for John Key.
I'm going to talk a little bit about United Future very shortly. I want a short comment because it was in the news in the last couple of days. This figure called Simon Lusk, Rodney, does a person in a party who works right in the shadows, pulls the strings or perhaps sort of advises. Does every party have these types of figures like Simon Lusk?
Every party has them, but they're not top figures, they're bottom figures. and so they can join up to a party and then write emails and present themselves as having this great big say when in fact they don't. And I think Simon Lusk is definitely in this category. And I've never met the guy, but when you saw John Key say that on a scale of 0 to 10, he regards him as a -1, I'd safe to say that with this current administration, he has no say.
And yet, training MPs, sort of fairly well-known MPs. I mean, would the ACT Party have done a similar thing, having people come in and training MPs like Simon Lusk has been doing to some of those backbenchers?
There's always people prepared to help, and
Right.
there'll be campaign managers within electorates, and MPs will acknowledge them. But I know this. Simon Lusk is despised by the current hierarchy of the National Party because he's a big noter that pretends to have a power and a say that he doesn't.
Would you agree?
I would agree that the current lot that are in power, that faction that is currently holding it, meaning John Key, Bill English, etc., those that are more in the moderate kind of centrist type of areas, but can manoeuvre the ideological kind of positions. Yeah, no, he is poison to them. But what we know is Simon Lusk was the strategy behind campaigns in the past for the party. He's the strategist behind the anti-MMP campaign that put to referendum at the last election. He was in behind Don Brash's campaign to replace Rodney as ACT leader.
Did you know that, Rodney?
Yes, so that's correct.
And he also is right behind the move to make sure that Judith Collins is the front runner at any time should John Key bow out. Remember that what Rodney is talking about there of National losing its coalition partners, that's a reality for National. They'll be looking at ways to make sure they have life after the next election. They may win it. They look like they're positioned well to win it, but that doesn't mean that they will. And if they don't, John Key has already said he will leave Parliament if he does not win an election.
So is this the larger picture then?
There's a big picture going on. There's a juxtaposition. It's always been thought that you would look at Stephen Joyce as a potential front runner, or you're going to look at God forbid Jerry Brownlee or someone like that. It's not the case. Where the power is shifting in the back rooms is with Judith Collins. Lusk is there with that. We know that. We know that the connection with the Whale Oil blog with Cam Slater is well solidified there. It's public knowledge now as well.
Rodney, will Judith Collins be the new leader of the National Party?
I don't know. It's typically in these things that the next successful leader sort of comes more out of the back bench. That if you observe it over time, you don't tend to get a successful leader coming from a high-profile position within the current administration. So to me, the best strategy is always to reach down to a David Longy or a John Key and lift them up. And I guess that's why David Shearer is so disappointing, because he was the new face. He wasn't associated like, say, Phil Goff or Annette King with 9 years, because we get tired of politicians. No matter how, I'm not saying anything negative about these people, we just get tired of them. And when someone new comes along, it creates a new story, a new interest, a new invigoration. And so I would have thought in the top tier of the National Party, if they lose the next election, they'll be in opposition. I think if they were smart, they'll be looking further down the list to bring someone fresh and new up.
There's just one thing to that, is Judith Collins has been leading in an effort in the Auckland region right across to identify the new wave of National Party candidates that they're positioning now to go into electorates like Paul Hutchison's electorate, for example. These aren't young, fresh faces in the sense that they are mid-career professionals. They want a term in opposition and then they go in basically straight into cabinet, like Stephen Joyce went straight into cabinet, didn't he? It's that type of person. She's been lining them up. Their loyalties are to Collins. They're not to anyone else. The power is with her, really.
It doesn't work like that, though, Simon, because you think of it back in 84 with Jim Anderton. He organised all the candidates. He was the National Labour Party president. And post 1984, they all thought he was a nut job and abandoned him.
Yeah, but
so just selecting people and supporting people into a seat, when they get into Parliament, they actually tend to look around, with a fresh pair of eyes. And, look, I've got no doubt that you're right, that there's all this machinations going on, but it has always struck me in my experience in politics that those that are doing the machinations always fall short. Because people don't like it, people in the party don't like it, people in the caucus don't like it, and I think that's where Judith Collins will struggle.
Well, that'll be interesting. It may be the case.
Interesting stuff. We'll have more after this. Text us here. Text live to 3920. We're with the politicos this morning talking about the issues across the week. Back very soon. 25 minutes past 8 o'clock with Selwyn Manning and Rodney Hyde. Your email is most welcome. radiolive.co.nz and go to the Sunday page. That's where my email address is. Now, the Food and Schools program that National have rolled out has been far more divisive than I would have imagined, actually, but that's where it is. Let's go to Rodney Hyde first up. The Nationals roll out a Food and Schools program, partnering with People Life Sanitarium. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's a big symbol. I think that's why it's so controversial and people have an opinion on it, because, the thought that you're living in New Zealand and having to feed kids at school is horrific. That was something that not so long ago we would have pointed the finger at other, the United States. What do I think of it? Look, this tragedy is that after years of welfareism and dependency, we've got a significant number of deadbeat parents who are neglecting their kids. The lack of breakfast is a part of it. I don't think it's treating the problem. I think it's sort of papering over the symptom of child neglect.
But it's something, huh? It's something.
It's something, but I don't know how big it is, and I'll tell you why. The only survey that we've had was done by the Ministry of Health over 10 years ago, and it found that there were 83,000 children in the previous week had gone to school without having breakfast on one or more days at home, but that 76,000 had breakfast, would you believe, on the way to school, and those that were skipping breakfast at home were older children and most predominantly females, and so that doesn't correlate necessarily to poverty, if you know what I mean. There's odd things going on here, and of course it's a bit of political positioning and posturing, because when Labour were in power, we were giving low-income groups money, and this wasn't seen to be a problem. But with Labour in opposition, they've bet the government over the head, and National have responded. It hasn't cost any money, nothing to speak of, and so it's their positioning across the centre line and actually taking the heat out of Labour's attack.
All right, then. Well, Selwyn Manning was shaking his head vigorously here. Selwyn.
Yeah, I think we need to get out of the shower if we think there is not a poverty problem in this country. Rodney, there's that old song, "Let me take you through the streets of London." I'll show you something that'll make you change your mind. It's that kind of situation. You get down here into some places in Auckland, in this super city, and you have your eyes peeled onto some of these things. The fact of the matter is there are kids that are suffering the consequences of their parents' neglect or their parents' inability to provide for them. Now, I think when that situation is true and when it's obviously there, then it's the community and the government does need to actually take a responsibility.
So, Selwyn, you're saying that you need to take Rodney Hyde by the hand and show him through the streets of Auckland, huh?
Yes, that would be something to behold, wouldn't it?
I'd pay to see it.
I'm not denying that there's a big problem, Selwyn. What I'm saying is that it's actually an unfortunate outcome of years and years of welfareism and dependency, and that we're not going to fix it and make these kids PhDs and doctors by giving them breakfast in schools. Why? Because you're absolutely right. We have streets and streets and streets of dire poverty and neglect in New Zealand, and not just in Auckland. But don't believe that by giving $20 a week, $30 extra a week, or food in schools, or increasing the housing allowance, it is going to improve it. Sadly, it's going to get worse. Why? Because we've built up this huge momentum where kids are having kids, and the kids don't know how to shop, they don't know how to cook, they don't know how to look after themselves, and they certainly don't know how to look after their children. The
problem with this all, though, is it's an ideological argument. What this thing demands...
What's ideological about that?
Well, the free market and the libertarian type of approach obviously doesn't. Thatcherism was wrong. The trickle-down theory does not work, and the consequence is evident in the communities now that it has not worked. We're not talking about ratcheting up talking about ratcheting up welfare and putting more money in the back pockets of the parents that are neglecting children or not able to control or budget that money. You're talking about putting it into the mouths of children here on this issue.
Ask me this question. Answer me this question. What happens in the school holidays?
Well, that's another challenge, isn't it? And that's something where the community response that I talked about needs to be plugged in as well. This is not just a government response. It needs community response, it needs business response, and it needs parental response.
All right,
as well.
What a hot button issue. We want your feedback on that one. Text live to 3920. We are with Selwyn Manning and Rodney Hyde. Emails welcome. We're back right after the news update. 35 minutes past 8 o'clock. A very good morning to you. We're with Rodney Hyde and Selwyn Manning this hour talking about the issues through the week. On the back of that, I do want to come back to a topic I've just got here. Carol says, why should I help out my community with feeding the kids during weekends in schools when the parents can't be bothered? If you supply the families and not the schools with Weet-Bix and milk, the kids would still go to school without. That's what Carol says. But I want to come back to, because it has been huge, the issue of the cartoon, Selwyn, Al Nisbet's cartoon for the Marlborough Express. I want your opinion on that, because it's been the water cooler topic of the week.
Yeah, I think, there's an argument that, does he have a right to do that? Well, yes, he has a right. He's been able to do that. But what it does say to me, that there's a whole constituency that actually supports illustrating an out-group. This is, to me, it's about, it is an attack on race and it's an attack on class. And I'm not coming from some sort of weird kind of way back 1950s Stalinist point of view here. I'm just saying here that, that those two cartoons in particular illustrated one where the hand was out to get government handouts. Meanwhile, it was going to go on to Lotto, etc., etc. It's a stereotype. It's accentuating the outgroup.
All right, so what do
propaganda.
What do we got? You said it's propaganda. You've got these fat Maori kids. One says, let's not. We've got more money now to spend on booze, pokies, or whatever. Rodney Hyde, were those cartoons racist or were they not?
No, I don't believe they were, but I accept that people can be offended by them, and I accept that they were, if you like, exaggerating and making a stereotype. But in a funny way, that's what cartoons always do, isn't it? They exaggerate a person's features and the rest of it. And what I think we should do is actually demonstrate, if we don't like it, that we don't like it, and that's how you make the change. You shouldn't be changing the law and then starting to censor cartoonists. Yeah. It didn't bother me. I didn't think it was funny.
On that point on censoring, I just, Tom Scott said on Friday or Saturday that, usually a cartoon is the most effective when it actually challenges those in power. It challenges the powerful. What this is doing is kicking the guts out of those that are in a non-power position.
And that's the difference, Rodney, to someone like Tom Scott, who's a bit of a genius, I think, isn't he, in cartooning?
Well, you see, of course. But, it's up to Al Nisbet and the editor to decide, their cartoons. And in a funny way, there's almost this reverse sense now, isn't it, that you can't criticise Maori, or you can't criticise people that are down and out and legging it a bit, and you can't make a bit of fun. You can't have that sort of sense of humour and irony. And I think, let's be fair, that there was a bit of truth in what Al Nisbet, said, that there are people that rip the system off. Well, he was just drawing attention to that. And I mean, what, are you going to be the person that says he can't do that? Are you going to be the person that says, oh, well, unless he's attacking John Key or David Shearer, he can't write a cartoon? No. Let's live with it.
All right, then let's put it to Selwyn, who's got a big smile on his face. Is there a case to be made that some people on the dole do go out and have their...
Of course, some people do, but they're obviously in the majority. If you start looking at the stats and figures, the proportions of the people that are actually exploiting the system. What is coming out here is a convenient stereotype, and we know from history that it's a sour point, a scab on society when that kind of is advanced. Not talking about censorship here, he has every right to do it. What I'm just talking about is if there is constituencies that supports kicking the guts out of people that are trying to actually reach their potential, well, then that's a pretty sick situation.
All right, text us here, text live to 3920, then your message. What are your thoughts on that cartoon? Offensive, racist or not? Moving on, I want to talk a little bit about United Future. I do feel sorry for Peter Dunn, Minister for Revenue, the United, now perhaps a leader without a party. Rodney, United Future, who are they? Who were they? Will we miss them?
Wow, that's a big series of questions. Look, they grew out of, when we introduced MMP, a whole bunch of MPs who knew they were toast in their own parties decided to form a centre party, and Peter Dunn was the only one of them to win a seat. and he's hung on through various strategies, but most critically, holding his seat of Oharia Belmont, and he's been very useful first to Helen Clark, because in 2002 he won enough to actually mean that she could form a government, and of course he's been very useful then to John Key, just with that one vote. That's how critical MMP becomes. So he's very inoffensive, and he sits in the middle, and he's been Minister of Revenue, for 100 years.
That's true.
He's probably the longest serving
minister.
He's probably the longest serving minister we've ever had of anything.
Yeah.
Wow.
Rodney's right, and in the area where United formed way back just prior to MMP being rolled out, and you had people like John Robertson from the National Party and Clyde Matthewson and others form. Ironically,
Gordon Campbell, was he part of that as well?
He came later.
Oh, right.
What I'm getting at here is there's this ironic connection to the food and schools thing, because United's policy that it rolled out, the first big policy was an apple a day. They said the government should be providing an apple to every kid in every school in New Zealand. It was their flagship thing. It says, put milk is in the past, the apple's the one that will keep you healthy.
I didn't know that.
And it rolled it out prior to the 1996 election.
So they won.
But the irony is that Peter Dunn is not positioned to actually support the bill that would feed kids today. Maybe he's walked away from the party's original ethos or principle.
It'd be hard to imagine, though, guys, a political landscape, Rodney, without Peter Dunn. So what would happen then if
look, don't read too much into this. What's happened is this: you've got to sign, a president or secretary of a party's got to sign a form and says, I've got 500 members. He may have a new secretary, or the secretary's reread the rules and thought, hang on, I better check this, and they've gone back through their records and said, actually, I can't guarantee that we've got 500 members. There's a big fine attached to this. I'm going to let them know that we're not certain. They're going to get 500 members, presumably, and then they'll sign off and they'll become a party again. It's almost like a technical issue. They've got to probably get 50 members or 60 members and sign them up quickly for $1.
Yeah. And the word is right now, Wallace, there's that, people have been flooding back to put their name back where they'd neglected to have them listed as members. That I think Rodney's right. It's going to be back in party status pretty soon.
All right, there you go. 842. If you are I never do this, but if you are a United Future member, you are quite welcome to give us a phone call here on 0800 Radio Live and fly the flag for
put $1 in.
put $1 in. Now the Resource Management Act, Claire Browning says tinkering with the RMA will take us back to the dark days of what was called Think Big, Robert Muldoon's scheme, where ministers were in charge of development. Jeffrey Palmer calls it a constitutionally highly objectionable approach. And I was reading Michael King's History of New Zealand a couple of years back, and he almost devotes a chapter to this massive piece of legislation called the Resource Management Act, which, Selwyn, was groundbreaking in its day, was it not?
Yeah, it was.
And there's been 21 amendments to it, and now they're going to be tinkering it with again. What are your thoughts?
Oh, there's a couple of things here. I think National is starting now to respond to the calls and demands of its donors and stakeholder groups. They've been wanting the RMA to relax its areas of control in the development areas. I think if you look at it from a coordinated big picture plan, Auckland needs to expand or go up, or a mix of the two.
Yes.
And all of this is obviously going incognito with that want. I think, in some strange ways, it's connected with the Lusker argument that we were talking about at the front end of this program, in that Lusk has long represented, supposedly, the interests of a group of developers, a group of stakeholders or donors. And it seems that National is now wooing those, but it's been a long time coming from their point of view.
It was introduced in 91 to cover the use, management and protection of the environment. That's the main thing, where it is in the public interest to be regulated. Your thoughts on the RMA, Rodney? You would have had a little bit to do with it.
In fact, I was involved in the 80s and part of a group that was advising the government on its formation until they kicked me off. So I was advising Jeffrey Palmer on it as an environmental scientist at the time. But it's not, look, all governments have struggled with it. So you recall that, like, Len Brown wants the RMA fast-tracked for his plan for Auckland. Helen Clark was going to fast-track it for the stadium in Auckland. So governments do come along and say, I do not like what National's doing on it. I think the RMA should be dumped. I think we should be rethinking it. I'm in a very small minority, I accept, because everyone gets up in arms and says, oh, what about the environment? There are better ways to protect the environment than this bureaucratic nightmare. I tell you what I hate most about the RMA, the fact that it takes years, and more particularly, neighbours are having to pay out neighbours in order to do little work on their sections. Groups are actually being paid off by business not to object. And I mean, that's not the sort of society you want to live in. And to me, we need a far more streamlined process and a bit more respect for private property rights, rather than lathering everyone in their nana to complain about what you want to do.
For the first time in New Zealand's history, it gave environment groups and the public the chance to object and be heard against ministers in business.
But look what Geoffrey Palmer says. He says on every measure of environmental quality, New Zealand has deteriorated since the Act was passed in 91. So how do you square that?
Well, maybe that's through the 21 amendments that's happened over the years. But if the RMA in its truest...
It's pretty funny.
You know, there's big problems with the RMA. It's administration of the Act, in a sense. You know, if you look at it, I'm sure thousands of your listeners would know that there are such long delays for resource consent on things that are going to get consent. You know, so why are these the bureaucratic delays? Tradies tell me, so I'm sure they're telling other people, that sometimes they're waiting up to 2 to 3 years for a simple thing. There are projects that are sitting there that should be happening, should be developing, that have been stalled at council level. You know, there's also a move where the super city came in, that some of those building inspectors in the south and in the north and the west were told by the central counterparts, listen, you know, your prices are too low. You got to hike them up. You know, you've got to bring them up to what the Auckland standard is, the centre of this. And then there's all these delays that started to creep into the outer suburbs of this. This is a bureaucratic nightmare, and the councils need to be challenged.
I can back that up, Selwyn. I've been involved in the preschool as things would happen, and they've been fundraising for 10 or 11 years to shift, and they've shifted into a church hall. Do you know the RMA cost us $200,000?
Oh, you're kidding. No, it didn't.
Now, the problem with this
actually blew all the money that had been raised with cake stalls and all the rest of it. And, you know, there was one difficult neighbour, and they pursued all the avenues and rights that they had and ended up in the Environment Court. And, you know, it's there now, but it blew the money that was going to be spent on, and it's a community trust. You know, that's the nonsense of this stuff. The problem with the RMA, in my view, is not that it's there to protect the green belts, that, you know, the native bush pockets, etc., etc. The problem with the RMA is in its administration, just to underscore that. No, I'm afraid you're wrong, because we've been changed it 21 times and still can't get the administration right. The problem is it's fundamental in this, and actually Wallace hit the nail on the head, because it allows everyone to complain. Well, if you allow everyone to complain, it is going to be a bureaucratic, it is going to be a nightmare, it is going to be a nuisance. And we know too that people are complaining actually not because they're right necessarily, but because they oppose the development, and they know they can put such a lot of cost on the development, like the preschool, that it won't happen.
But Rodney Hyde, are your allegiances often on this one, do they sit on the fence a bit in terms of morally and ethically? Because here you are, you're from the libertarian perspective, let's say, but also you're a biologist. You lectured on these things. Biology, was it biology?
Sure, I was the only member of Parliament who was, you know, had a master's degree in environmental science.
So how does that square with your?
Well, very well if you got an hour, but it works like this. Basically, if you understand ecological systems, you know that you can't have a bureaucratic legal plan to fix it. And the reason I ended up a libertarian was, you know, I was busy working, you know, at a university trying to come up with policy for the government on, you know, optimal depletion of coal and all the rest of it. And I thought, I knew how little we knew about biological systems. And I realised that, you know, we almost have an engineering approach to it, that we think that we can come up with a plan. And I realised that we needed a thing that was a bit more learning and trial and error and growth. And that's the great thing, if you like, about freedom and a proper set of rules, because it allows people to make decisions, it allows feedback loops, it allows people to learn. There you go, quickly in 2 minutes.
Interesting stuff. 10 minutes away from 9 o'clock, we're back with Rodney Hyde and Selwyn Manning right after the break. 7 minutes away from 9 o'clock. After the break, we have the soundtrack to your life for the hour with Gray Bart, a musician, entrepreneur. Would be really interested to hear your emails. I know that a lot of you will have something to say about the Resource Management Act, just on the back of what both Selwyn and Rodney were saying. You've got a play score there, or a centre having to pay couple of $100,000 for the Resource Management Act, or as Selwyn says, tradies ratcheting up the prices, or councils clipping the ticket for the RMA. Interesting to get your emails on that. Text me here to 3920 or radiolive.co.nz. Sunday page, my email is right there. I guess slightly related, guys, is the unitary plan. The submissions have been in and called for. Selwyn, we need a city that apparently doesn't sprawl out, but sprawl upwards, or go upwards, not sprawl upwards. Again, hugely controversial topic, isn't it?
Yeah, I think...
Not in my backyard, please.
Yeah, I know it. Everybody's saying that. You can sympathise with the average Auckland homeowner here.
Yes.
That they've invested everything in their property. They see their values going up on their property and they think, well, we've got a good nest egg for when we finally do retire.
And yes.
And then something like that comes along and you kind of think, okay, the plan is here. I can see what they're going to do. They're going to whack up chicken coop type apartments that we saw in the 1990s and the 2000s spotting up all over Auckland. That's going to be my next door neighbour here. And people are thinking, no way, don't want a bar of this. I think the remedy here is a mix of both. The Nick Smith model of sprawling from, almost Hamilton all the way to Ruakaka in the north, I think, in having an industrial wasteland along that main track corridor is folly. But I think a mix of the two. But we've got to watch things too. And I think there's this issue here where good fertile land, good productive land in the South Auckland area, for example, in Pukekohe, Bombay, rural parts of Takanini, Ardmore, they're being lost. If you look at Takanini, for example, you've got 3 metres of topsoil there that's good fertile soil in many of those areas between Takanini and Ardmore.
Right.
Now they're being designated industrial and heavy industrial. It makes no sense. The water table, for example, makes all the earth soft. It's all topsoil.
There you go. That's a good local issue there.
Like
well, I think the last time I saw you, Rodney, in person was on a plane. You were coming back and you had a couple of years back a briefcase full of notes about Auckland. So the unitary plan, what do you make of it, outwards versus upwards? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think everyone's going to agree with Selwyn that it's a bit of both, and I think I would favour more the outwards. And I was just thinking, listening to Selwyn, you must live in a very miserable world when all the land's being eaten and the kids aren't being fed. But Nick Smith has never proposed that it starts in Hamilton. All the government is having an argument about is, how tight to build it, whether to, let the city breathe out a bit more. And, the current proposal was to push it up some more. And funnily enough, this is very much tied into the argument about public transport, because if we're going to rely on trains, you want them squeezed in around rail stations to make that work.
So we need more.
So I think it's a good debate, and it's a debate that Auckland is going to have because, the unitary plan has crystallised it, and yet it is something that's going to have to be confronted sooner or later because of Auckland's enormous growth.
All right then, Rodney, getting Auckland moving, how do we do it?
Invest heavily in infrastructure, and in particular roads and buses.
Roads and buses, Selwyn?
Yes.
If it's going to sprawl out, and this is where the current government wants it to go, then we do have to have self-sustaining kind of communities and metropolitan centres outside of this reliance on the Auckland CBD. And there needs to be development that actually addresses not just the social needs of those communities, but the employment needs. Yes, we need industry, we need, the economics of scale in these areas need to be well developed. We're not seeing a lot of debate on that. We see it's starting to materialise, but it's almost through stealth. And some people who have bought land blocks and things like that out in the Drury area of South, they're saying, oh, look, our values are going zero, because it's suddenly, what we are looking at here is heavy industry right through our pockets here. So, this needs to be brought out into the open. And I think that is where the debate should go, that the hidden aspects of the plan and the agenda be rendered in the past, and that Aucklanders have the decency to know what is going to come their way.
And rail or roads for you, Selwyn?
We need public transport to be well organised here, and we also need people to get to where they need to get to earn a living. The emphasis, in my view, has been too much on the internal CBD politics.
Very interesting. Hey, Rodney Hyde, a pleasure to have you on for the hour.
Always lovely and always good to be with Selwyn.
Yeah,
Fantastic stuff, a fantastic
It makes me feel so happy.
Miserable
Me
Selwyn.
too, Rodney.
And Selwyn, hey...
I listen to Selwyn and I think, life's not too bad.
Well, you need to cheer yourself up with a nice hot chocolate, perhaps, Selwyn. What do you think,
I
eh?
don't know about that. I kind of have been smiling right through listening to Rodney's comments. It's been better than watching full